Hello and welcome to Weird Around Illinois. For today, we're going to talk a little bit about UFOs and what could be mistaken for a UFO. So let's get weird. To me, a UFO sighting comes down to basically three possibilities. Either it's a UFO, it's a hoax or a intentional fake, or it's a case of mistaken identity. And I think of all of them, probably the third one is the most likely, the case of mistaken identity. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here. And, we've had some experiences before where we've seen what could be a UFO. There's the 4th of July sighting where we saw something kind of hovering in space for a long time. And then we had the fast-moving objects that we saw after the earthquake. And then you guys had a completely other experience where you saw something that you knew wasn't a UFO start to look like one, right?
Yeah, we were just, playing badminton outside in the windy day, and we just kind of looked up, and suddenly we saw, like, a couple balloons just floating up into the sky, and we were like, what the heck? That's not something we see every day, but happens every once in a while. And, eventually we kind of lost track of it. But then later on, we found it again, like where it floated up to, super high up. It looked like two dots just in the sky. I couldn't see a single detail except for two dots. No strings attached. It looked like two dots were just floating. And this was during the day, obviously.
Yeah, and that's basically what prompted this episode, really.
Yes.
We really thought it didn't look like balloons at all up there.
Yeah, from images I've seen in the daytime of UFOs, they are just black dots that aren't really moving erratically, but just kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that, kind of bleeds into one of the most famous non-UFO sightings, at least according to the government, we've had in recent years, where the Chinese spy balloons, or the weather balloons, or whatever balloons you want to call them, were spotted over the U.S., and the military itself thought at first they were an unidentified object. The one of them got shot down before I think they realized what it actually was. It was a balloon.
Yeah. And weird enough, one of them was over Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm. But nothing weird ever happens over Lake Michigan. Didn't you read our comments? So what other objects do you think could be possibly seen as a UFO innocently?
Well, I guess there could be kites.
Yeah.
Those usually are held by people, but I suppose if you accidentally let go of it and it's a super windy day, it could go super high up, and maybe the shape happened to be pretty weird.
Yeah.
And it would look like a UFO if it got high enough.
And those strings break too. So,
Yeah.
If a string breaks and that thing takes off, you're just seeing like this weird, kites have all different shapes now. So you'd be seeing something that looks like a Klingon bird of prey flying through the air.
Yeah. And then also something you could see is Chinese lanterns. And a lot of cultures, I guess, they put, candles inside of like red, like a cylinders, flies up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for certain ceremonies and funerals and things like that, there are times those lanterns go up, and you never stop to think that what goes up, number one, gets seen while it's up, and number two, must come down. So you find weird stuff laying all over the ground, and you see weird stuff in the air, and you don't stop to think that there's a direct relationship here.
Yeah. And then this connects to the 4th of July encounter, possibly drones.
Right.
That was the first thing we thought of when we saw the mysterious light floating, like minimal movement in the sky on 4th of July. It was super weird.
Yeah, I remember my first thought at least was a drone because there were fireworks going on, like right around that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it may have been watching the fireworks. But then like way after the fireworks were done, it was still there. We're wondering why it was just hovering there.
Yeah, and it was shifting a little bit. Clearly it wasn't just a still object.
Yeah.
I know there was one other thing that you were going to talk about on the objects list. That was satellites, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to add something to satellites. Go ahead and say whatever you wanted to, and I'll throw it in there.
Well, satellites are always kind of high, and although I've never seen one in the sky, I'm sure it'll just look like a dot from our perspective.
I want to say it's probably not possible to see it unless it's like really, really dark.
Yeah.
I've never seen a satellite myself, but I know they're really, really high up in space.
Mm-hmm. Well, now my brother saw the satellite chain once, when they were, I guess SpaceX or whatever was bringing the entire line of satellites up, and you see like 30 dots in a row going up at high altitude.
Oh, wow.
So it looks like UFOs flying in formation. But the thing that I wanted to mention, they called this an iridium flare. And I don't know if it's because the company or the name of the satellite was Iridium or what, but apparently there are these low orbiting satellites that people see from time to time, and they appear to be moving very, very fast across the sky because of the speed of their orbit. And the reason I bring it up is because when I was reading about them, they very closely match the things that we saw that night when we were seeing all those different lights high up in the sky. The only thing, and we can get into real UFO sightings later, but the only thing that makes me doubt that what we were seeing was entirely those satellites is I'm pretty confident that a couple of them changed speed and direction. Whereas, I think the odds of seeing satellites at cross paths like that on the same night would be kind of slim. But apparently a lot of people see these things, the low orbit iridium flares from satellites.
Interesting.
So sometimes objects can be piloted or have passengers, and that would be another thing that could be mistaken, right?
Yeah, and people can sometimes see maybe airplanes, but they'd have to be like really high altitude if you're gonna think it's a UFO. Because if it's like maybe 10,000 feet in altitude, you're not really gonna think it's a UFO because you can clearly see what it looks like.
And you'll see the flashing lights. If you see red and green flashing lights, then you know it's a commercial aircraft or at least an aircraft of some kind.
Yeah.
If it's somewhere above, I think it was like 37,000 or 42,000 feet, it's gonna be a military airplane or something like that.
Yeah.
It could be just a general commercial airplane too, that high.
Yeah, up to 37,000, I think, is what we said was
Okay.
the ceiling for commercial flights.
Yeah,
I think
that
around
makes sense.
40,000.
Oh, is it 40?
Okay.
But the other thing is you've got that nice tracker app, so that, if you really want to figure out if something's an airplane, you can use that app and identify exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, helicopters is another option. Those are usually flying lower though, so
Yeah.
I'd expect that to be kind of more identifiable.
Yeah, and they're louder too. Well, maybe it's because they're lower, they're louder, but it's rare that you'll see a helicopter and not hear it, unless it's a military helicopter with some sort of sound dampening on it.
Yeah. And then hot air balloons too, and like blimps. Those again are usually kind of low, so I wouldn't expect that to be seen as a UFO sighting, but you never know, they could be super high in altitude for some reason.
Yeah, or if it's, dodging in and out of the clouds, particularly like a silvery blimp, and you just see like the rounded edge of it peeking out of the clouds, I could definitely see somebody mistaking that.
Yeah. One thing I'll say though is these don't like zip by like UFOs do.
Right.
So those sightings would be kind of questionable.
Yeah.
So I mentioned clouds. That kind of leads us into natural features that can be mistaken for UFOs, and clouds are first on that list. I mean, there are many times people will see like a densely packed cloud that has like a disc shape or a cigar shape, especially if it's at a higher altitude. They'll think, oh, that's a UFO. Or some people will even take it to the next level and say, oh, that's just like a special cloud that is screening a UFO that was created by the UFO to hide it. Which, I don't know if they do that, but if they do, that would be a really, really good camouflage technique.
Yeah. Well, and it gives us like an illusion sometimes. If we're looking at stars, for example, if we see it like through the clouds, it might actually look like the stars are moving.
Right.
Really, they're not.
Or it'll make it look like they're disappearing and reappearing.
Yeah.
So speaking of stars, people do mistake stars for UFOs all the time. Again, there's a handy app that'll tell you what's a star and what's a planet and what's not. But if you don't have that app, and you're looking up at the sky, you'll see twinkling lights, and as you say, the clouds can move past them and give you that idea that they're moving or disappearing and reappearing somewhere else, and it can fool you into thinking that it's a UFO. Similarly with planets, I think Jupiter and Venus are the two that are most commonly mistaken for UFOs. Probably Jupiter because it's so big, and Venus because it's so close. And it's kind of between us and the sun, so it tends to get illuminated really, really well sometimes. And then, of course, there are shooting stars, comets and meteors. These get mistaken a lot for UFOs because they are a fairly rare occurrence to be seen with the naked eye, and they can be pretty definitive. You see this thing streaking through the sky at high speed, glowing like a fireball. Your first thought is, wow, that's something extraterrestrial. And you're right, it is extraterrestrial, but it's just not necessarily a ship.
Yes. And one way to tell the difference is it's probably going to have a massive trail behind it of fire or some kind of color.
And that leads us right into the other thing we were going to talk about, which is what separates a real UFO sighting from some of these mistaken sightings. And, you bring up the lack of a trail. A real UFO will probably not have a trail behind it, unless it's like passing through the tail of a comet or something.
Yeah, and even some planes leave a trail of some kind of steam or smoke.
Yeah, like jet planes.
Yeah.
And you especially see that when they're around like 40,000 feet in altitude.
Yeah.
Because they're so high.
It's easier to see during the day, but I'm sure you could sometimes find it at night.
And then, we've talked a little bit about this already, but most people, when they see what we would call a real UFO, it's moving fast. Or at least it's capable of moving fast. Sometimes they're hovering and then they take off like a shot. Sometimes they're just moving fast across the sky, and you can immediately rule out, as we talked about, the more stationary stuff, the balloons, the kites, the blimps. And if they're moving ridiculously fast, you can even rule out like airplanes, because we've seen airplanes move across the sky. They're not instant. Even the big jets that are flying at 300 miles an hour, it still takes them a while to cross the horizon.
Yeah. From our experience, they were only going like half the speed in comparison to the other one. But once more, that's a different conception because one was higher and one was lower.
But you'd think the higher one would move slower.
Yeah.
Another thing to watch for is change of direction. That to me is a dead giveaway that something is either man-made and controlled, like a drone or an airplane or a helicopter, or it's a spaceship.
And again, it really depends on how fast that change of direction happened.
Yeah. In a classic UFO sighting, it seems like there's like a hovering time, and then suddenly the UFO decides to leave, and it's gone in a shot. It like takes off across the sky, and in a blink, it's gone.
Yeah.
Another thing that I thought would be helpful in recognizing real UFOs is just light. And I know, with a plane, we mentioned that they have usually red and green blinking lights. Other aircraft may have just a solid light or a blinking light. Sometimes an object like a balloon, or particularly if it's a Mylar balloon or a drone, can have light reflect off of it and make it look like it's glowing. But a true UFO, it will have like a constant light that you'll be able to see usually, like it's emanating from inside it. And a lot of people even describe multicolored lights. Orange seems to come up a lot, and yellow, but light can definitely be an indicator.
And sometimes people even see those lights like rotating in like a sphere.
Right.
Would a reflection like that be able, like, let's say all three of us were at different angles, would we be able to see the same reflection, or would it like change?
I think it depends on how far away it is from us.
Okay.
Because if we're standing 15 feet apart from each other and the thing's at 40,000 feet, our angle of deflection is not going to be that different.
Okay.
But if it's at 50 feet and we're standing 15 feet apart from each other, one of us is going to see no reflection at all. One may see it reflected very brightly, and the other may see just a partial reflection.
All right.
So, with all that in mind, we've obviously got a lot of things here that can be mistaken for UFOs. So that kind of makes it real easy to say that the vast majority of UFO sightings are probably not UFO sightings. And not anybody's fault, not that anybody's trying to make false reports or fool anybody. It's just that you can make honest mistakes based on all these things. And then you add those together with the actual fakes and frauds out there, and you see that real UFO sightings are a fairly small percentage of what actually gets reported. And with all that in mind, you guys think we saw real UFOs?
Well, the reason why I was asking that reflection question before was because I was trying to actually think, did we see some kind of reflection from some kind of object? instead of just constant light.
I would be tempted to say that, except we saw it in several different directions, which
That's true.
I found really odd.
That's the thing I would say too. You know, if we had seen one object that night, we could explain it as one of those iridium flares or a comet or a satellite. And yeah, it was a little fast moving for some of those things, but I would be willing to accept that. But the odds of seeing any one of those things multiple times in one night from multiple directions, that doesn't seem feasible to me.
Yeah, in different locations yet too.
Yeah.
I don't understand how they're so common yet, like not a reflection.
You know, we have seen it in like multiple locations, not just like the parking lot
Yeah.
or not just where the earthquake one
Right.
happened.
Yeah, we saw a couple of them a few weeks after that in a different state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of begs that question that I brought up in the last podcast about it, where, you know, is it just that we have so much light pollution around here that we don't see it? If we were to go to southern Illinois or northern Wisconsin or something, would we be seeing these things every night?
I don't know. I've looked around here, but I haven't seen any. And like you mentioned earlier, they zigzagged. We all could clearly see that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what else could do that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty confident that wasn't a trick of the eye with the clouds. I'm pretty sure I saw actual zigzag motion on a couple of those things that we saw.
Yeah. And we could say it was clouds, but there weren't really any clouds out that night.
Yeah, to me, I think what we saw, at least on that first night, I think had to be either something extraterrestrial or an experimental government aircraft. Has capabilities beyond what we as regular citizens know about.
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility, to be honest. As scary as that sounds.
Yeah.
Wait, it's more scary to you that the government has this than the aliens have it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'd have more faith in the aliens.
Yeah. Well, I can't say I blame you. Well, that's our take on possible UFO mistaken identities. If any of you have had UFO sightings, or if you feel like we've missed something on this list of things that are mistaken for UFOs, by all means, we'd love for you to share. We always look forward to your comments. And as always, thank you for listening and thank you for subscribing.